Call this meeting to order, Oconee County Planning Commission. This is Monday, September the 18th, 6 p.m. Our first order of business is invocation. Sir, if you will.
Yes, sir. Folks, pray with me if you will. Heavenly Father, we ask you please watch over this committee and the planning staff and guide us to wise and safety-conscious decisions in support of the public. We also ask that you watch over the county law enforcement, first responders, and other county workers as they perform their duties, that they may return home safely to their families after every shift. And we ask that you please watch over the county and state leaders as they work to make the county and state a better place to live each day. In His name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Danny, sir.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, sir. All right, you have before you the minutes of our last meeting. Has there been any changes, corrections, misspellings? If none, I need a motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Unanimous.
We have no public comment for non-agenda items. Commission member comments?
I got a comment.
Go ahead, sir.
This is to the public. We need your help. We need you to show up at the meetings, and we need you to give your opinions. We don't care if you agree or disagree with us. We welcome you here. That's all.
I'll second that. We need more public involvement in our meetings. What we do affects the public, and they need to come let us know if we're doing it right, or if we're doing it wrong, whichever. I know it's Monday, 6 o'clock, but you could come to every other meeting and help us out a little bit, if you could. Anybody else? Oh, and we've got the Heritage Fair starting tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon, right outside of Westminster, between Westminster and Seneca. All come out and support the farmers. It's one of our big things, and it'll help the farmers to get out and see what they do. You don't know, maybe you'd love to try to grow corn. They'll show you how to do it. So if you can, come out and visit. I'd like to see a couple of y'all on some of them rides they have out there. So, but anyway, our next thing is staff comments.
Okay, October 2nd is our next meeting. Mr. Kyle Reed has agreed to be here for that meeting for y'all. So something to look forward to for next time. And that's it for today.
And he is, I'm sorry,
The Roads and Bridges and Assistant Public Works Director.
for the county.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My follow-up question on that was, do we have anybody from the state coming?
Not yet, but we're still working on trying to.
We had talked about
coordinate
having
some
them
dates.
together that day, right?
If we can get
State
them both
and
at the
county?
same time, that's great. If not, we got one that's agreed, so we definitely wanna keep them on the schedule, and if we have broken up over 2 meetings, I figured that'd be all right, as long as we get them here eventually.
Yeah, be nice to have them both at
Good
the
job.
same time.
Thank you.
We're just trying to coordinate it.
One at a time is better than nothing at all.
Have we given them a list of items that we're kind of hoping to talk about so they'll have some preparation?
I gave them just some of the general stuff from the last time we had about how funding worked, kind of looking at how roads were inventoried and analyzed and prioritized, but didn't give them a whole lot more than that. I just told them generally.
That sounds
be open
perfect.
to,
I've got a suggestion. I know there's a lot of buzz about the potential large development on Highway 130 near Newry. Is there a way we could give them that scenario and ask them how they would walk through that review?
I can ask them. I think that is actually something that's going on right now, so I don't know how many details they'll share, but we can certainly ask and see what the response is.
Anything else, gentlemen? All right, if not, we'll move right on. Item number 8, discussion regarding South Carolina Right to Farm Act, agricultural control-free zoning, agricultural notification policy, procedures from other jurisdictions. Before we start our discussion, let's start with the last item on that, the procedures from other jurisdictions, and give us an idea of what other areas are doing.
Sure. Do you mind if I just, okay. So after our last meeting, you asked us to kind of look at some ways that other areas were doing notification priorities and how they were registering farmlands and giving people methods to be aware of farming activities close by during property transactions. So I reached out to the American Farmland Trust to see if they could help us find example policies from other jurisdictions that they've worked with. Haven't heard back with them yet, but it's only basically been 5 business days. We also had our Clemson intern Isaac work on what's in front of y'all on the screen. And basically this is a portion of some of the work he's been doing for the Agricultural Advisory Board on voluntary agricultural districts. And I'm sure y'all have already had a chance to kind of go through some of these. I will say the one that I found the most compelling was the one from California. And that was the farmland mapping and monitoring program that they have. And I want to have some specific discussion around any of these, pull them up as you go through them, and try and help answer any questions you have.
All right, this time I will open the floor for discussion on any one of the remaining 3 items. I will start. The agricultural control-free zoning. Until we get some residents, farmers, tree surgeons, just some agricultural people to our meeting, I don't think we can really discuss an agricultural control-free zoning. I think we need to, the ag board is fine, but that's only 7 people. That's not the entire agricultural committee that the community that we have out here. I think we need to get some people, whether they're comfortable or not, to come to our meeting, discuss the problems they're having, before we get into trying to come up with an agricultural control-free, because it's not gonna be control-free. There's still gonna be height restrictions. There's still gonna be, just like our control-free that we have now. So we need to get some people filling some seats out front to give us the direction that they would like for us to come up with this particular plan. I have no problem with it. I just want to get some people to voice opinions, give us some information before we go deep into that particular subject. Now, the Right to Farm Act and the agricultural notification policies, maybe we can discuss some of that stuff, but to actually come up with a new zoning classification or a zoning area, whatever how you want to name it, we need to get some feedback. I know they expect us to do this stuff, but we do something and then we get our butts chewed out because we did something wrong that they didn't like or they don't agree with. So we need to, all of you, y'all know people that grow stuff, y'all know people that are in the farming community. Maybe you know somebody that grows pine trees or grows whatever. Try to get them to these meetings and let's get their opinion on this stuff before we try to come up with a new zoning classification. Because that's what it's gonna end up being. It's still, everybody hates zoning, but this is gonna be a zoning classification, not just a throw it up in the air, you accept it or don't. It's gonna be zoning. So we need to get some opinions from actual citizens of this county rather than having an empty audience out here and us trying to come up with an ordinance. So I would prefer we just leave that subject off for this meeting until we get some feedback from the people that want to come in and fill some of these chairs. Now, it's up to y'all.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
so I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. The Ag Board spoke. I'm a farmer myself. I raise cattle and timber. The Ag Board was very clear.
The two people that were here.
Well, they were representing the Ag Board, and they had stated as such. So they have spoke, and as you had stated when we passed the Ag 2 zoning ordinance, that it's an option. So what we have now is residential agricultural ordinance, agricultural 1, which is commercial, but we have nothing for those who are in the control-free zone. So why were we so bent on passing the other ordinance for an option if we're not able to create an ordinance to capture the large majority of farmland here in the county and make it an easy task for the county to put it on a map so that whoever's buying next to them will understand what they're buying next to? Because it's been stated over and over, one of the biggest reasons why these farmers did not move into the ag zoning was because of the restrictions. That's why the ag control-free zone is very important to getting our farmlands located and identified. It's an option. And I can't see why we would have it one way where it's an option, okay, we want to work on this and pass it, and now we're saying, no, we don't want to give this option.
I didn't say anything about no, we didn't. I just want some people to come and give us their opinion on what they think this zoning classification is gonna be. Because it's well known that control-free is not control-free. Even if you say agricultural control-free zoning, it's still gonna have everything in it that control-free has right now. It's gonna have the height restrictions. That may interfere with we call it their grain silos. It could, I'm not saying it will, I'm just saying it could. It could interfere with a lot of things, but we need to I'd like to have some people to show up at our meetings and say, this is what we want in that particular ordinance.
Mr. Chair, I have to ask you, the land that's not zoned in Oconee County, what is it?
It's called control-free.
Is
It
that-
has control. It says it's control-free, there is controls. If you look at the control-free, it's not, you can't just do whatever you want. There's still restrictions in that zoning classification.
So let's not muddy the water. All we're
Okay,
asking for is identifier
That's
of the
fine.
control-free farmland.
That's fine, y'all you can do what you want. That was just my suggestion, to get people in here that actually do the farming, tell us what they actually want, instead of taking two people's word for it. And that's the only two people we've talked to is those two people on the ag board. We didn't talk to any other farmers, other than if you went out on your own and talked to them.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I did talk to the large majority of the ag board.
Well, what about the rest of us?
If you chose not to talk to them, that's on you.
You're not the only one on the planning commission.
But
There's
I understand.
6 other members that need that information as well.
Well, okay.
I'm not being a butt, but I mean, all of
Here's-
us need to know the information rather than just one.
The ag
Y'all
board
fussed
came
it
forward,
because-
the ag board came forward
Two people.
in representation of the ag board, and now we're telling them that's not good enough. The Ag Board came forward and said, hey, we did not want this zoning, and we went ahead and zoned. So
We are
are we
not
going to listen to
zoning
the Ag Board
anyone.
or not?
Zoning in this county is all volunteer. If you don't want to be zoned, you don't change your zoning classification. It is volunteer. We're not forcing anything
My
on
point
anybody.
exactly. I make a motion, we continue down the road of creating the ag, control-free zone so that the farmland can be identified.
I'll second it.
I've got a question. There was a meeting prior to us meeting with the Ag Board. There was a meeting of the Ag Board that they had given to county council something, and then shortly thereafter, the Cattlemen's Association or some group said, whoa, that wasn't actually representative of what we actually want. I don't know anything about it because I'm not in that group, but did that happen, and can you share more of that?
I'm not a member of the Cattlemen's Association, so I can't share what they had discussed during their meeting. Far as I know, when I spoke to the Ag Board members, after the meeting we went to, were the Clemson exchange students supposed to give us a PowerPoint presentation, I think it was, which I spoke to a majority of them, and they were all in agreement with the movement in the direction they had discussed at this meeting.
And that's why and I may be completely off on it, but there was just some conversation late last year or early this year where there was a subgroup that was saying the ag group is not speaking for us. And so I was just wondering if that had been resolved, or did I hear that wrong? or-
Well, if that's the case, then they should be here today. They should be up in the speaking at the Ag Board, but they're not. And I just hate to see us kick the can down the road and lose momentum to do something good for the farmers.
Can I
Go ahead.
clarify what you're talking about?
Yes, please, because again, I don't know what I'm talking about on it. I'm just hearing different things. I want to make sure we have a,
Towards the end of 21 or 22, the county council elected to start an agricultural task force, specifically looking at the loss of farmland within the county. There was a special task force group that was assembled that had Mr. Pearson from the Planning Commission, Ms. Alexander from the Agricultural Board, representatives from the Farm Center, Mr. Gibson, the Soil and Water Conservation was represented, the Conservation Bank from the county was represented, and probably missing somebody. But there was a draft final report that was released, and the Cattlemen's Association was upset because they didn't feel like they had enough representation in the survey that was sent out. That final report's already been issued. That was issued kind of at the beginning of 23, sometime maybe March. And that's where that conflict was. So that wasn't the Agricultural Advisory Board, that was the Agricultural Task Force, which would be pretty
Okay.
easy to get confused.
gotcha.
That the Cattlemen's Association, there were a couple other individuals who would have liked to have given input on that survey that didn't feel like they were reached out.
I guess the reason I bring that up is if we are discussing this, this is where those seats need to get filled if people have concern.
I agree. And I wish there was another mechanism we could use to identify the farmland. This is the only mechanism I've been able to come up with that would not have tremendous amount of glitches in it. The farm exempt status goes and comes as the land's developed. So unless somebody else can come up with a way to protect the farmers, all we're going to do is continue to tie them into a control-free zone, and that farmland's never going to be identified.
Okay, so going back to frame the problem. The problem is farmers are getting frivolously sued, correct? That's what we're trying to protect these guys against.
That's one of three problems.
One of three, yeah.
All right, so what are the other two
So,
problems?
so for the last 5 years that I've been up here, 4 or 5 years, gosh, it's come back and forth, and I've heard several things. One, the lawsuits, like you talked about, and I think that's where the Right to Farm Act should give protections. The other two
Does
that I've
not.
heard,
It does not give protections. That's where,
Where it should but does not.
correct.
The other one I have heard is unsafe roads. You're driving a combine down the street and or the two-lane road and now there's traffic. It's getting denser and denser in the area that's cutting off tractors and cutting off things, trying to get down the road with their equipment and fearful of a problem, or some of the 18-wheelers that are servicing some of the farms, having trouble getting back out onto the roads, things like that. We're hearing that as a problem number 2. To me, that is a development side issue. The more we have development, the more we have traffic on those roads around those farms.
The reason I'm wanting us to discuss and frame these problems is because what Mickey's proposing, the control-free ag zone, will solve problem number 1. Well, it won't solve it, it will mitigate it. It will not do anything for problem
2,
number
and
2.
it won't do anything for 3, and that's what I was about to bring up. The last one that I keep hearing is the loss of farmland in the county.
It won't fix
And
that.
so the only way to mitigate those is a development standard to deal with acreage so the developer doesn't want to go there. And let me change it to a kind of another conversation a little bit. There are people that love HOAs. They go into an HOA community not because they want to regulate themselves over trash goes out on Tuesday and lawns are mowed by Wednesday, but they want to go into the community for a like kind that they know their neighbors are like them, that they do want to mow their yard once a week, or they do want to have trash cans kept up, or whatever, for whatever reason, they want to go into a like kind neighborhood so they get a part of an HOA. What we're proposing by this zoning is kind of that HOA mentality, but it's a conversation with farmers where they can go, I want to have this farm, I want to kind of maintain it for my kids. Would you, Mr. Farmer, next door neighbor, do the same, and let's join in to this, it's zoning, but think of it in terms of an HOA. Think of it in terms of, I'm going to be into a like-kind community where we're going to put together something that says, I'm going to maintain my land in a certain way, and I would hope that you would do the same. To me, that's a fairly easy sell if I'm a farmer, because I'm talking to my neighbors anyway about what are you doing with your land next year. To me, what's hard are things like this talks about conservation easements and things like that, because I could never have a neighbor tell me to put my property into a conservation easement. No way, no how am I going to do that? But I would join with my neighbor on doing something like a zoning criteria. Now, that will, again, like you said, potentially mitigate number 1. The question I would like to ask the public is number 2 still a concern? Is the unsafe roads still a concern? Or is the loss of farmland in the county still a concern? Because these, number 2 and number 3, aren't going to be dealt with by doing this identification
And
mechanism.
I'd like the staff to capture that, framing that problem, issues 1, 2, and 3, if you would, for the minutes.
Because I really think that we can deal with 1. The way to deal with 2 and 3 are going to be a density standard, to require a developer to go back and request from the BZA to change it. And now all the other farmers can come in and go, whoa, 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 you know, we all agreed to do this in our area. Is this really okay? That would be a density standard. And I don't know if I was a farmer, if I would want a density requirement put like that on me. But it would be something that would be out there as a volunteer mechanism to solve 2 and 3, if 2 and 3 are still concerns. If they're not, let's rock and roll on 1 and be done with it. I would ask that as we zone it, control-free is a weird criteria. It's not zoned, but it is zoned, but it is a restriction, but it's not. I would like us to convince the farming community we're not going to call it control-free, but it will have the same criteria as control-free. But we're going to call it agriculture triple stars, agriculture the sunshine, whatever we want to call it, but don't call it control-free, because we really shouldn't be having a control-free category in the county anyway.
Okay, so now to the next problem. So let's suppose we go through this scenario and we come up with a control-free ag zone where it doesn't do anything different basically than control-free, except for it notifies the adjacent property owner. They're required to fill out a disclosure, some kind of disclosure notice for adjacent property owners when they sell their property.
That's
How
actually
do
not
you,
quite, that's,
how do you capture that?
So-
How does the county work through that logistic such that the neighboring property owner, when they sell their property, are required to provide notice of the agriculture next door?
I don't know that you can, and I don't know that that's
How do you-
that's the objective. Where the objective would, so what is controllable is the nuisance factor that we've talked about from a state disclosure standpoint. Seller's required to describe nuisances. But who can describe what's a nuisance? I mean, that's like saying,
But what good
pick
is
your
even
favorite
coming
color.
up with a control-free zoning?
So what
think
it,
do? What is it
if there
going to
was,
do?
if there was a zone that could be publicly identifiable on the computer, and you had buyers that were concerned about that, they would have access to a public awareness. So if they were moving into an area or moving into a
What does that
neighborhood,
look
they
like?
would physically be able to see, is this an agriculture through the trees there on the other side?
It'll look similar to the lake overlay.
It's an overlay, yeah.
So it's just I think if we're gonna protect farmland, we've got to identify farmland. And we got to make sure that we
Well,
put
the
out.
farmers need to identify their farmland. It has to be voluntary.
That
Right.
should be the first thing that happens before we try to come up with what kind of control-free zoning we want. We need to identify where the farmland is exactly. I
Well,
mean, because there's farmland all over this county. It's not all in the fair play area.
Frank, I
That's,
think, Mr. Chairman, sorry. I think what the goal is to come up with this voluntary, control-free ag zoning, and then the farmers have to identify themselves into it. That's how it gets identified. If they don't play their role, it doesn't do us any good, doesn't do the county any good to identify it.
It needs to, I'm sorry, it needs to be able to explain to the farmers, this is why you want to go out and sell it.
well,
This is
that's,
why you want to do it.
that's one reason in the last meeting, we talked about the tax exempt property that was in the control-free zone area. And I understand what you're saying, call it anything but control-free, but I think it's going to be harder to sell, especially to a lot of the farmers. This is the same thing, but no, it's not, because we're not calling it the same thing. Going back to what I was talking about, if we can identify the farmland multiple ways, so that whoever's developing next to them, maybe when they file for a building permit, they get a disclosure notice. When they go to buy that property and they view it on the county's website, at the property viewer, they see that, hey, this is a funny looking shaded area next to me, what is it? And they click on it and find out it's farmland. So when the farmer goes to court because the neighbor that moved in next to them suing them because of the smells, noises, whatever, they can, they got a little bit more ammunition to say, hey, listen, you knew this. You had ample opportunities to realize this is what you was buying next to. And that's the problem that the farmers run into, is they go to court and they're really limited on what ammunition they have, other than, well, I've been farming this land for several decades now. One other thing before I forget, so traffic, you talked about density, but traffic, now I live up in a very rural part of the county, up near Whitewater. This time of the year, this is our last cutting of hay. This is also when all your leaf watchers go out, which is starting. And so and we got McNeely trucks going down and the other big trucks going up to cashiers and all. So it's a busy road. I will say the transfer truck drivers, they are very careful. But the people that really come close to causing an accident for me, and I'm speaking just for me, are the people that are in passenger vehicles that are in a hurry. Because they will pass you in a curve, they get upset, I've even had the state put up tractor signs.
None of this solves that problem.
None of this solves that problem, but here's where I'm going with that. The activity I just named about them passing you in the curves, them getting upset, and the speed they're traveling, if we had more patrols in those areas during those times, that would help slow down some of that. I don't think a density study is going to slow down those areas because they're not developed. Now, there are some areas that are developed, but I think there's never one simple solution. And I think that's something, if we identify the properties, then that gives law enforcement something, if they've got any spare time, to go out during these key seasons and just kind of drive through those areas and catch these individuals that are passing on the double yellow or trying to run you out of the road. Or passing in the curves.
Would signage, you were talking about tractor signs.
It does no good.
Does no good?
No. The state put up tractor signs for me many, many years ago. I was hoping it would help. The people still give you the California howdy.
Even before, when they brought up the idea of putting up signs for the farming areas, it's gonna be the same situation to me. Put up a sign that says this is a farming community, people are gonna ignore that just like they do the tractor signs, or the only thing that would get their attention is if you put speed bumps every 2 feet down the road. I mean, that would get their attention, but that's it. They don't pay any attention and don't really care when they see those signs. They'll see a deer crossing sign. They don't care to let deer crosses right when they get there and hits the car. That's the only time oh, there's a sign there. So the signage, I don't know, I mean, it looks nice and all this, but I don't know that that's gonna help. It's gonna,
I wasn't recommending signage.
No, I'm just saying that, but
I was recommending
at one
giving law
time-
enforcement a tool.
At one time, the two, people that came from the ag board, that's what they were saying. Well, we wanna put up signs. I don't know that signs help anything. I mean, people don't look at signs like they used to. And like I said, deer crossing signs, a deer can't read a sign, a tractor can't read a sign, and evidently most of the people that drive up and down the road can't read signs. So, I mean, signage is not, it
Mr.
looks
Chairman.
nice, but I don't know that it'll help any.
Just a point of order. We've got a motion on the floor with a second to have staff draft a control-free ag zone ordinance.
I have one more comment to that part. I still say control-free is an element out there that is not a zone. If we say ag control-free, I think it's gonna imply then that control-free is some type of a zoning mechanism. What if we call it ag controls zone? The free part, that we already have a window that's called control-free, that really isn't a zone, is confusing enough to people. Is it that much harder of a sell? I'm confident we've got a high level of intelligence among everybody in our county. This is like control-free, it's called ag controls zone or something, but something other than the word control-free, because it's too similar to what we've got, is my concern.
Well, we
Or
have,
agricultural identification.
we have ag residential. And then this is where I was going with that, is you got ag residential. You've got ag, which is actually ag commercial. We now have, what's ag two?
Same as ag.
It's ag commercial with just
Okay.
5 acres.
larger tracts.
So really, that's where I was going with that, is we really don't have anything for control-free agricultural land.
And people are just staying in control-free.
Right.
Staying in an unzoned category. The concern is that all of a sudden, because the biggest thing about zoning is once you're in a zone, you can't come out of a zone without going through BZA. Well, now all of a sudden, you've got 80% of the county that's control-free going, well, I do this, they don't do that, or vice versa. It just, the control-free part, to me, seems too similar to this 80% desire to be control-free. That's my only concern, and it's not.
Clarification. they don't go to the BZA to go from one zoning classification to another. They have to come before us.
Before us, to try to
If they're-
change that.
if
I
they're
don't see an
That's true.
issue
You're
with calling
correct.
it ag
exemptions
control
and
free.
things, they go to
Yeah,
the.
that's right. So they come before us, if it's zoned in any category, they come before us, with the exception of control-free. And when in control-free, you can go into something, but you can't go out of it.
So any rezoning comes here first. You have 60 days to make a recommendation to council. Once council received it, they have to put it on their agenda within 60 days. And then it takes 3 readings from council. You guys just hear it once.
Even coming from control-free to another one, correct?
Any rezoning, yeah.
Yeah,
So
if
any
they're
rezoning.
control-free, they're supposed to
to
come
ag
before
or
us
to
first,
rural residential.
and then we send a recommendation to council. Council takes, then they take it from there, the 3 readings and public hearing.
I think the purpose of ag control free is that you ought to be able to switch back and forth if you want to without going to a board of zoning appeals. It's not a zoning. Neither one of them should be a zoning.
Okay. Is that what you're talking about? Is this really not a zone? It's
It's
just an
identifier.
identifier?
area.
Okay.
It's an area.
Can that be done?
Don't know if you could just have individual parcels self-identify out of it. Well, you could, so technically you could, go through the normal hearing process for an individual parcel, have a recommendation from this body, and then have council make a final determination. I don't know about just switching, control-free to control-free. That would be a question for your attorney.
So, and then if we are just having an identifier,
You could even
Right now
call
to go
it
into a
control
zoning-
free with ag identifier. You could just still call it control free.
Well, if you call it an ag area, where it was whatever designated on the overlay,
so,
you just, and then people, if they wanted to get into it, you just enlarge that area as an identifier.
An overlay is a contiguous area. So it wouldn't be spot.
so right now, we have a criteria for going into a zone, whether it's self-zoned or otherwise, of 50 acres? As an ag identifier, will we need to come up with criteria, or can you just say, hey, I want to be called ag control free, and then next week, I don't want to be called ag control free anymore?
That's my concern, and that's why I'd say you need a different person to ask that question to, as far as the identifier. That would be an atypical type of zoning.
I would like to see us not pass the motion at the moment and see if we can get the attorney in here to ask us so that we can, because I like the idea of, but does it have enough teeth to do what we're hoping it will do as far as this identification mechanism?
My concern is, what does it look like implemented?
Ultimately, at the end of the
I
day,
think
we
it's a
want a
nice
map.
idea, but I don't.
But if it's a map
I've got
that
problems with
has,
the logistics and the expense that it's gonna, and the county resources that would be required to deal with it and manage it.
so my concern with it, if it's just an identifier, is right now it's identified as ag control-free identifier until a developer buys my neighbor's property, and now he goes and zones it to residential. And so it's no longer an ag identifier. So from the public standpoint, are they gonna go, well, today it's ag control-free, but tomorrow it may be residential or whatever, because it's really not a zone?
Well, that's pretty much what happens anyway.
With the exception that in zoning, there's the readings and the public notices and the signs that go on the streets and things like that.
It boils back, one of the things that the ag identifier can be tied to is your tax exempt status.
So do you want to make a motion to,
I think we're still in
There's a
discussion.
motion still on
Yeah,
the
we got a
floor.
motion on the floor.
well, he can make a motion to table
Postpone.
or postpone this, and that motion will be on hold until
You
the
can do
next.
that, you can withdraw the motion and just make a new motion to, it's up to y'all.
I would like to
I'm
have
trying
the
to-
attorney start talking to, because I like the idea. I think the attorney needs to tell us how we go about getting it done.
Well, let's venture on down this road. So, what keeps them from going from ag control-free back to control-free.
Can't.
Right.
If it's a zoning, if it becomes a zoning classification,
No, we're talking as identifier now.
if it's just an identifier, they technically do not come out of control-free.
That's correct.
So they'll always be in control-free unless they get into a specific zoning classification such as agricultural, residential, agriculture 2. Then they're in zoning, then they have to, then control-free goes away for them altogether.
So I'm just asking a question, brainstorming here, okay? So if you identify along with your neighbors, that 50 acres, and all that 50 acres is tax exempt from ag, what do they call that,
Agriculture exemption.
If you want to go back to control-free, one thing to stop them from switching back and forth would be giving up that ag exemption.
My concern about that is we did hear from the ag group that said many of our farms are 5 and 10 acres. So you're saying that anybody that's under 50 acres individually is going to lose their ag exemption
No, well,
because they can't go there to begin with.
no, I'm saying once they go into the agricultural identifier, they can't come out of it, because what would be the reason of coming out of it if you're no longer agricultural property?
Right.
So therefore, you give up that agricultural exemption. And like I said, I'm just brainstorming this. I've not thought about this. I'm just throwing it out there so that we can discuss it.
That would probably be an automatic thing. Just say I had an ag exemption on my 10 acres. And I sold it to you decided to build houses on it. It would automatically, when I sold it, that ag exemption comes off of it at that point. If you continued to farm or whatever, you would have to come down here, and they would put everything in your name at that point. When I sold it, it would come out of my name. The ag part of it would come off too, you know what I'm saying? The exemption would come off too. Because you can't sell what the county, if they're giving you, older people pay no tax up to the first 50,000 or whatever, you get a tax exempt. But if I sell it to Mike, he's only 29, he don't get that exemption, he has to pay it, has to pay the tax, more tax on the whole land, you see what I'm saying? So that one thing doesn't go, it stays with the person, it doesn't stay with the land.
Well, it scares me doing this stuff into the taxes. The tax stuff is challenging enough as it is. That really scares me to tie this to taxes.
Yeah, that's too complicated. It's
Then you have
you're
rollback
trying to
taxes
solve a
and
harder
everything.
problem than you're creating a more difficult problem than the solution you're trying to solve, in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you're getting back your return on your effort.
State your motion again.
Our motion is to direct the staff to create a ag control-free district.
And is that a zoning district or just simply identifier?
I
The
think,
original motion was as a district. I think we're at a point where we're probably gonna amend this motion prior to voting on it or go in a different direction altogether.
Is there a way to just get a preliminary draft, just like someplace to start? I mean, just like, okay, now, what are the logistics, what are the legal questions, blah, 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 you know what I mean? Is that
Can I make a motion inside of a motion?
You can make a motion.
A motion to
a
amend.
friendly
I'd
amendment.
I'd like to make a motion to amend. I would like to ask staff, see if I can do this right. I'd like to ask staff to come to us with some of the logistical issues. Because if it's a zone, we currently have a 50-acre scenario. If it's an identifier, does that mean anybody with a quarter of an acre? If it is an identifier, is it going to be a logistical problem to go in and out of from a staffing standpoint? I'd like to ask staff to identify some of the logistical concerns based on what we're discussing here, so that it'll help us determine which way to go with this moving forward.
So you're gonna add that on to the original motion?
That before we proceed further with the original motion, that we ask staff to give us this guidance.
But that seems logical.
I'll second. I think,
Is that a yes, I second, or?
yeah, go ahead.
He thinks.
I think I
He might
understand what
retract
he's
it
doing.
in a moment.
I think I understand what he said.
While we're on that note, we probably all, when you're saying staff, is that also the clarification from legal?
Oh, yeah, I'm including that.
Okay, now
Well, that way we know what road that we can't go down. We know where our obstacles are, our hurdles are
Yeah.
in this process. Because I like this.
Mr. James, please restate the entire motion.
Okay, so the motion to amend is for staff to come up with logistical issues tied with agricultural control-free as discussed during this meeting tonight.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
It's unanimous?
Now, the original motion,
That was it.
So we've amended the original motion, and now we'll vote on the motion as amended. Unless you'd like to have some additional discussion.
Well, we discussed the lawsuits, we discussed traffic.
How can we vote on, the amendment's really almost like a separate motion. That it's an investigatory activity that supports whether or not we can even vote on the main
Right.
motion. So how do
it
you
really
vote on
needs
the
to be
main motion?
postponed
so
until,
we'll
Find that out first.
table
Yeah.
or postpone
You can
postpone the motion
until we hear from staff.
until we hear from staff.
And then we just plead that anybody that is a farmer that has concerns to please come to some of these meetings.
I
Because
agree.
we sure are looking for guidance.
That's my motion.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It was to postpone
Yeah.
the original motion. All right, do you have any other things on the Right to Farm Act, sir?
Not right now.
Not right now.
We're confused enough, thank you.
You've already went over the stuff from the other jurisdictions.
I would say, one other thing I failed to just, was I did include the, American Planning Association's policy guide on agricultural land preservation. It's very thorough, it's several pages long, but does go through a lot of the things y'all are talking about specifically, and does identify some policy positions that you might just consider as you're going through, even more of the agricultural, not just the agricultural control.
I see one interesting line on here. Taxation strategies should be developed to discourage the conversion of agricultural land to other
I would
uses.
say some of them are better than others. And like I said, it's a very, very
discussed
long
that
and
one.
thorough list.
We actually do have that in place already at our county
We do.
level.
That's right.
They're called rollback taxes.
All right,
That is also included for your perusal.
unless there's any other discussion, I need a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, motion.
Second.